Well, good afternoon or good morning, depending on your time zone today. This is Russ Carnahan, President of Preservation Action, and pleased to bring to you this congressional briefing for Historic Preservation Month and have leaders from key historic preservation partners with us on the call today. This group has also been very much encouraging of members to join the Historic Preservation Caucus. It is led by Earl Blumenauer of Oregon and Mike Turner of Ohio, bipartisan leaders of that group for some time. And they've been a great vehicle to organize messaging and advocacy in defense of historic preservation programs in DC and quite successfully in recent years. So that advocacy would not be as successful as it is without key historic preservation leaders at the state and local level around the country. One of the things that we've done recently is started a Preservation Action Hero program. And at the end of recognizing people throughout the year, we vote for the Preservation Action Hero of the Year. And this year, 2021, we are so pleased that the awardee is Fairleigh Jackson of Louisiana. She's been a great advocate, not just in her own state, but also reaching out to her federal leaders and very active in our Historic Preservation Week advocacy in DC. Live and in person, but also virtual in recent times. So with that, I want to just turn it over and recognize Fairleigh Jackson for brief remarks and just to give us, to give you our great thanks.
Thank you so much, Russ. I'm seeing this photo and realize it's time for a new headshot with a new haircut and all kinds of things that the pandemic has brought us. But so thank you all so much. This is such an honor, especially to be nominated amongst the other individuals that were nominated, including my friend and colleague, who is also a Louisianian, Danielle Del Sol. So this was quite an honor. And I want to thank you all on this call, all of the leaders, that we all support each other, share information, share best practices. Also, the partnership on our local, state, and federal level, that's where it all starts, is collaboration and support. And many thanks to Preservation Action and the National Trust and NTHP and all of our federal partners. And I'm truly honored for this and excited to keep working. And then I'd also like to thank all of the wonderful members of our legislature and the incredible staff members that we work with. You all are just incredible, and we couldn't do this work without you. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Fairleigh, and keep up that great preservation advocacy. It's a great model for other folks to follow.
Thank you so much.
Next, I want to confirm, I know we were trying to be flexible on schedule for Congressman Troy Carter. Is the congressman on the line?
I don't believe it's at the moment, but.
Okay, we are, I know he's doing, I understand he's doing some events in district today and is going to try to call in during this program. So we're going to just watch for him to join, and we'll fit him in as his schedule permits. And then we're going to go on, start with our panelist, Ted Monason from the National Conference of State Historic Preservation Officers. Ted is their Senior Director of Government Relations, well-versed in the Hill and well-versed in preservation advocacy. Ted's been a great ally, great asset, working with Eric Hine, their Executive Director. Please welcome Ted.
Hello. First, I want to confirm you can actually hear me, Russ.
Yes, you're good.
Outstanding. This is perfect timing for this briefing, considering the efforts that are currently going on to get an infrastructure bill completed. what I'm going to try and sketch out, and which will make sense, what I just said about the infrastructure bill, is why there is federal government involvement in historic preservation, why there is a caucus, why we're even having this briefing. And to give you the basic background of it, you had the creation of the interstate highway system, and you had the urban renewal programs of the 50s and 60s, and a lot of America's historic resources, minority communities were destroyed in that process, and little care was paid, or little attention for that matter, and certainly little care was paid to the destruction of those communities. And it was irreversible, but there was this realization that we could not let this continue to happen. So in 1966, you have the passage of the National Historic Preservation Act. And basically what the law does is any project that either requires a federal, and also Russ, tell me if Congressman Carter is on, because I can jump off and let him jump back on, because there was some text exchange that he was somewhere on here. So do not hesitate to let me know and jump in on that.
Yeah, and I think Rob or you'll let us know that.
Yes,
Yes,
Troy is on.
No, this is the congressman's staff. He's going to join. I'll text you when he does.
Thank you.
We will open up the program when he's on. Thank you.
Thank you. And as my fellow panelists know, I was under the impression this was tomorrow. So we all have our moments here, and a little flexibility is a good thing. So please do not hesitate when he does arrive. But the key from what I was telling you there with the National Historic Preservation Act, any project that requires a federal permit, such as Dakota Access Pipeline, for example, or requires federal funding, must go through a cultural resources review, which is known as a Section 106 review. Section 106 refers to the section in the law. And what Congress did with the National Historic Preservation Act is it delegated the responsibility for those cultural resources reviews, those Section 106 reviews, to the states. And they required every state to have a state historic preservation office. The logic of this is that, what historic preservation in Arizona is not the same as historic preservation in Massachusetts. Very different worlds, very different priorities, and thus we should make sure that the states are empowered to do this. This was later expanded to include TIPOs. Valerie will, the executive director of NATHPO, will talk more on that, but basically they also were delegated that same responsibility that states had. And then in 1976, you have the creation of the Historic Preservation Fund. And basically what Congress realized was that they had provided states and tribes later with this responsibility. They delegated this responsibility to them, but they had not provided the resources that they need. So a small portion of the royalties from offshore drilling are redirected to the Historic Preservation Fund, and that money is then transferred to SHPOs and TIPOs, and as I will briefly mention, also to some grant programs. And just to make sure everyone's clear on this, this is not a tax. This is a transfer of federal funds, and last time the Historic Preservation Fund was reauthorized, the CBO scored the bill at 0 because they said this is not a tax. It is a transfer of federal funds. Also, in Merrill Hoopengardner will talk about the historic tax credit more later, and I suspect Shaw will too, that state and federal governments work, the SHPOs work with state and federal governments to administer the historic tax credit programs. So that is also a key component of the work that SHPOs do. And the grant programs, and yes, as someone pointed out, the states work with federal agencies on the Section 106 review process. So thank you for pointing that out. But for example, with Oak Flat in Arizona, it was the Arizona SHPO that was working with the Forest Service on the Section 106 review. So, but thank you for pointing that out. This is a nice feature of the chat. Regarding HPF and what I just mentioned about grant programs, in recent years, some great grant programs have been created. These would be civil rights grants, grant programs for historic Black colleges and universities, for underrepresented communities, for rural communities. And these are quite valuable because it provides an opportunity to make sure that there is diversity in historic preservation, and that communities that may have less resources are not left out. So it's quite valuable. And very grateful for the support we've had from lawmakers. In the 5 years I've been working for the SHPOs, we have seen an increase in the HPF from 86 million to 144 million. And specifically want to just call out Congresswoman McCollum for her efforts on that. Obviously, Congressman Blumenauer, Congressman Turner, and also Senator Leahy has been just an incredible champion too, and quite fortunate about that. Just wanted to, and I'm going to wind up quickly. Thank you, Russ. Quick thing. So we're currently at 144 for the 144 million for the Historic Preservation Fund. It is authorized at 150 million. So we're literally bumping our heads against our authorization. So we are working with some lawmakers to see if we can both increase that authorization in the same way that the Land and Water Conservation Fund is fully and permanently funded, to do the same with the HPF. Going to hand this over to Valerie now. Thank you.
Thanks, Ted. As always, framing the issues so perfectly. I'm actually going to share my screen if I can overshare, but not overshare. I started my slides here using a keynote that I gave a few weeks ago at a conference, and I wanted to keep this title up here. This is an intentional choice. And the new administration, I think we have a lot of indications and a lot of high hopes that we will indeed be able to do this for the most part. So a couple of things to mention here, and I'm going to try really hard to keep to time. Got a lot of stuff going on. Presidential memo from January 26th or 27th, I believe, of this year. He did that right out of the gate, reaffirming President Obama's memo, reaffirming the executive order on tribal consultation, government to government, which is 13175. He added some phrases here that I think are really important: strengthening nation to nation, relationship building, and robust to meaningful consultation. So last week we saw flying around email, I believe it's a draft so far, but it's a pretty strong draft, Department of the Interior plan for implementing this memo. And I was pretty happy about what I saw there. However, I'd like to point out that all of this remains memos and executive orders. And so what we would really like to see is a unified federal tribal consultation policy. I think there are some key points that can be codified at the national level that would provide a lot of stability and uniformity with regard to that. And Chairman Grijalva a few years ago introduced the Respect Act that would accomplish this, and we would like to see that come around again. The Secretary of the Interior, Deb Haaland, of course, we're tremendously excited about that. And she's been very busy rescinding some former secretarial orders and implementing some of her own. the withdrawal of the National Register rule. That has been a really big, exciting development that we worked closely with the SHPOs on, and several of you on this call are also to thank for your efforts in making that happen. That would have changed the way that properties can be nominated and determined eligible for the National Register of Historic Places, and would in particular have considerably disempowered Native voices in that process. And that is about to be formally withdrawn and very, very soon. We would also like to see some regulatory changes to NEPA that were made in the twilight of the previous administration, as well as the Clean Water Act. We would like to see those revisited as well for similar reasons. I also want to add that as the Department of the Interior reworks their oil and gas permitting processes on federal lands, we would strongly advocate for tribal interests to be protected in those as well. Few more items from us. The STOP Act, that's safeguarding tribal objects of patrimony, that would prohibit the export of sacred Native American items and increase penalties for stealing and illegally trafficking items of cultural patrimony. It's been reintroduced. In fact, there was a legislative hearing on it last week on the House side, and a markup is set for the Senate side this week. So there's lots of momentum. And again, thanks to everyone who's involved in that and helping move it forward. So important, so overdue. Ted mentioned this, and I've got a lot to say about it. I'm going to try to keep it brief and civil. The Save Oak Flat Act was successfully marked up by House Natural Resources April 28th. Chairman Grijalva is working to see if it can be considered on the House floor, and we would like to thank Representative Blumenauer for being a co-sponsor of this. It's HR 1884, and urge anyone else here to consider co-sponsoring this bill. I'll tell you a little bit more about why. Interestingly, it's all about timing, right? The Biden administration argued on Friday in federal court, it's in the Ninth Circuit, that religious freedom laws and treaty rights cannot block the transfer of this holy Apache land to Resolution Copper, to copper miners, to destroy it forever. The Justice Department argued that even if their treaty rights had created a federal trust responsibility, I have to read this phrase to you, the 2014 land exchange, which was tacked onto a defense spending bill, extinguished the obligation. In what world is this a phrase that an administration can use in good conscience? I'm flabbergasted by this, you guys. It makes my blood boil. And I hope that everyone listening will realize what a travesty this is and consider supporting this act. I'm hearing jobs being used to justify this abomination. I want to point out that extraction jobs are necessarily short-term, while the destruction of this holy place and the contamination of the region would be forever. And furthermore, Resolution Copper's foreign parent companies, Rio Tinto and BHP, have terrible records supporting unions, and their claims to the contrary now ring as hollow as their promises to seek tribal consent and not to repeat the disaster of the Juukan Gorge destruction in Australia that led them to fire their own CEO. Where is President Biden's directive in this? Everything else will be meaningless if this plows ahead. We would also like to see the Greater Shaka region protected, as well as other sacred landscapes. This has to be a priority. There's Executive Order 13007 on sacred sites. There's an interagency MOU from 2012 implementing it. There's a treaty rights MOU from 2016. What do they all mean if this is allowed to happen? We'd like to see the Advancing Tribal Parity on Public Lands Act, which has not yet been introduced, move ahead. Senator Heinrich and Chairman Grijalva are working on legislation to ensure the protection of sacred sites and to highlight the urgent need for legislation in light of these significant deficiencies in existing law. Despite being sovereign nations, tribal governments are not even afforded by law the same rights as state and local governments regarding federal land management. We're going to have a Sacred Site Summit, hold the week of September 20th. That should be a hybrid event, hoping for some on-site attendance, but it will also be webcast. And you guys are one of our key target audiences. We're going to lay out the framework as it currently exists for site protection or lack thereof, what gaps there are, and how we can work together in this historic moment to start filling them and making these things better. Wrapping up here, you had also asked me to talk about how the pandemic has impacted THPOs, Tribal Historic Preservation Officers. Ted mentioned the HPF. This is my funding chart here. You see the green line, the total appropriation for tribes has gone up over time, and we're so grateful for that. You can also see that the number of Tribal Historic Preservation Officers has gone up over time. And when they track each other, the green and the gold, what you get is this red line staying relatively level. And that gives each of the now 201 there or more every year as tribes establish a THPO. 201 THPOs, an average of $75,000 to run their entire program. They're responsible for Section 106 reviews, among so many other duties. THPOs wear many hats: language preservation, museums and cultural sites, things like that. And funding, especially in light of the FCC decision that I don't have time to go into here, and the hits that tribes have taken from the pandemic are so important. And if infrastructure moves forward, tribes will need even more funding commensurate to enable them to complete the required reviews. We conducted this survey during our virtual conference in January of this year, and you can see that our priorities here line up with what our members and THPOs tell us they need. So thank you all for all of your efforts and moving the ball forward on all of these things. And please reach out to me if I can provide further information about continuing to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Valerie. It's for that great overview and really insight from the issues that the tribes have that are unique, but also the many common areas with other historic preservation groups. Thank you. Next, we're going to go to Kelly Hummerkhauser with Main Street America. Kelly, welcome.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Russ. Hope that everyone is seeing my screen correctly. My name is Kelly Hummerkhauser. I am with Main Street America. For anyone that's unfamiliar with us, I did want to kind of go over a little bit of background about our program today. We are a nonprofit subsidiary of the National Trust for Historic Preservation with a 40-year track record of revitalizing historic commercial corridors and main streets through preservation-based economic development. Main Street is very possibly active in your area, in districts throughout the country, and wanted to give you a little bit of sense of where we are, what we've been doing throughout the pandemic, and what Main Street needs in relation to historic preservation now, before you hear from my colleagues at the National Trust. So Main Street programs exist within 46 different state coordinating programs. Those are programs that serve the entire state through technical assistance, resource development, training for local entities. There's also a few coordinating programs at the city level in some larger cities, including Washington, D.C. So we serve about 20 districts actually in the city of Washington, D.C. So if you're out in H Street, Woodley Park, other areas, you are actually experiencing our programming. 2,000 communities at the local level participate with the Main Street Network, and about 1,200 of those local participating communities have formally designated Main Street programs, which means that they go through an annual process for developing capacity and go through a review process with the coordinating entity to ensure that they're kind of doing the revitalization methodology to its fullest extent. These programs at the local level are primarily 501c3 entities with strong affiliations to the city, though some are 501c6s and some are actually city entities. And Main Street programs across the country, 70% are actually in rural areas, and I think almost 50% overlap with opportunity zones. So we see a lot of programs that can take advantage of different incentives and different types of federal funding based on where they're located. Main streets generally at the local level have a mission to support the revitalization of the local economy through the preservation of historic buildings and assets and the development of initiatives to create a sense of place. So in addition to preservation activities, they're also working to bring people into the community through placemaking projects, through marketing, promotional support, and what we call economic vitality, which means engaging the entrepreneurs in the district to fill vacant storefronts and overall create a place where more people and businesses can thrive. So that's what we call the Main Street approach. It's the 4 points: economic and entrepreneurial development, physical improvements and preservation, promotional events, and partnership building and fundraising. With this kind of interdisciplinary approach, obviously Main Street programs have had a very kind of unique circumstance during the pandemic in terms of creating and trying to protect places through really trying to retain local businesses has been kind of the primary activity. But that's only one of the obviously the pillars of their overall work. So kind of as response to COVID, we've seen Main Street programs kind of do really innovative and interesting programming to help support local communities. And so just a few examples of this. On the top, you see a street market in Mount Airy, North Carolina, where they've really tried to entirely rethink what retail and experiencing a historic commercial corridor can be during this time. Top right is a restaurant promotional program in Georgetown. Then on the bottom right, you see actually Main Street programs are very active in getting a lot of protective equipment and PPE out to the local businesses and entrepreneurs at the height of the pandemic. So that's a flower vendor in Alpata in Miami. Main Street programs also try to keep businesses in place by helping to support rent relief programs. So in the center there you see, that's just an example of in Kendall Whittier, which is a district in Tulsa, Oklahoma. They created an entire program to make sure that keep the businesses in those historic storefronts to keep that district active. And then on the lower left, we also saw that Main Street programs kind of stretch themselves in wholly different ways. That's Equilibrium 3, which is a nonprofit Main Street program in Duluth, Minnesota. And they actually were helping out with food distribution through a completely free farmers market for those in need. So Main Street programs do many different things on the ground, but all of that is in kind of the context of that historic commercial corridor, where they're working to protect that physical fabric over time and also obviously create that local wealth. So those are just some quick examples. And as we look towards recovery, we know that Main Street programs, despite the fact that they've been doing all of this fantastic work for their communities over the past year, have also had some negative impacts financially to their own budgets. So Main Street programs are generally supported through a combination of civic contributions, local business contributions, and often those events that they do in their downtowns actually support them through sponsorship and other private contributions. So all of those have been negative, those sources have been negatively impacted. So throughout the pandemic, Main Street America has been seeking specific support to build the capacity back for local Main Street programs. 91% of them have had an increase in the amount of outreach that they've needed to do to businesses, helping them one-on-one, helping to create those local grant and loan programs. So Main Street programs are in need of support. So a main goal for Main Street America is to help those programs access funding. There's several different buckets of the American Rescue Plan that can be helpful to Main Street programs. So we're assisting them in making sure that they're advocating to their cities and their states for the state and local funding, and also looking specifically to see how funding for the Economic Development Administration can help national nonprofits that work with business districts. There are more entities like Main Street America that work with these business district entities, and we believe that the funding allocated to the Economic Development Administration through the American Rescue Plan could be fundamental in helping ensure that those local programs have the support that they need. We also know that a key need for our communities is more small business support. The Restaurant Revitalization Fund ran out very quickly, and keeping those restaurants in those buildings actually helps preserve the physical fabric of those communities. And so there's still an existing need for small businesses across the country. There's also needs for recovery that include more small scale development where there are commercial properties that have been impacted. Main Street programs can take advantage of potential infrastructure package improvements to the historic tax credit that I'm sure my colleagues will speak further about. And also many Main Street programs are concerned with downtown housing and really creating affordable housing in the upper floors of historic commercial corridors. And improvements to the historic tax credit could also be helpful in that arena. So I wanted to give you just a picture of what Main Street programs are experiencing at this time and how that plays into the possibilities for the historic tax credit. And so thank you very much. If you want to know more about Main Street programs that may be in your districts or communities, I'd be happy to discuss that with you at any time.
Thank you, Kelly. It's a great overview, and those local programs touch so many communities in such an important way. Thanks for the great work you're doing. I want to check to see if we have Congressman Carter on the line.
He's logging on now.
Okay.
He's in the process of logging on.
We can stand by, or we can put in one more speaker, as whatever works better for you all.
Oh, he's trying to get on. I guess maybe start. I'll let you know when he gets on.
Okay.
Y'all might need to let him in though. Or would he? I'm seeing if he's in the. Yeah, he hasn't logged on yet. So.
Okay, we'll go ahead and start the next one. We'll just as needed, and let us know if you have any other login questions. I'm gonna next go to Shaw Sprague, who is with the National Trust, is their VP of Government Relations. Shaw's been on the front lines of these issues in Congress for some time and has been a great partner, and also personally is the chair of the National Trust designee on our Preservation Action Board. So please welcome Shaw Sprague.
Well, thank you, Russ. Make sure you can hear me okay.
Yes.
Great. Well, thank you to Preservation Action for hosting this briefing, and to the Historic Preservation Caucus for the opportunity to present to the Hill and to the colleagues about the work that we do in support of historic preservation. What I wanted to do is just take a few minutes to describe a recent report that we've pulled together that provides an overview of the solutions, historic preservation solutions and recommendations that we are making to the Biden administration, which ties a lot of what you've heard today together. And you can find it in this report in a bit more detail with some examples. So what I thought I'd do is just run through it and just provide a snapshot of really the information that's in the report. So let's see if I can.
Shaw, we might interrupt you real quick.
Sure.
Sorry.
Please do.
I believe I see the congressman on the screen.
I just saw the note. Great. Congressman Carter?
Yes. Hello. How are you guys doing?
We are doing great, and we're so pleased you could join us in between work back in the district. This is Russ Carnahan. I served with your predecessor, Cedric Richmond, and pleased to see.
Don't say anything bad about him. He's riding with me right now, so be careful. I just want to give you fair notice.
Well, I want to give you a quick introduction. First, congratulations on being one of the newest members of Congress. Thank you for your interest in historic preservation and sharing with us the importance of that in your district. The congressman who's joined us, he has a long record of public service from the New Orleans City Council to the State House to the State Senate, and he's here at a very important time to be in the U.S. House. So, Congressman, welcome.
Russ, thank you very much for the opportunity to pop on. I know this is a staff briefing, but I was told by a very important person in my life, Leslie Bowie, who is a leader in our community and certainly a leader in everything preservation, that I needed to be on this call to say hello. And she's such a dynamo in our area that I'm happy to be here. Very proud of her accomplishments. I'm very proud of the great work that she does here. Very proud of the work that you guys do nationwide. As you mentioned, I previously served on the New Orleans City Council, the House of Representatives, and the State Senate, now currently serving as the newest member of the U.S. Congress. But in my previous capacities, I've always represented significant swaths of historic properties, from the French Quarter to the Garden District to Algiers and beyond. So the significance of having a coexistence between preserving our history while still making room for the future is something that's very important. And you can count on my continued support in making sure that we provide, whether it's tax incentives or credits, to make sure that we send the right message about what it means to preserve our historic character while still giving way for the future. And I think there is clearly a way to coexist. It's certainly the way that I've governed in all of my years, and will continue to do so, and look forward to working with the preservation community to do that, as well as to help many of our senior citizens and people that are on fixed incomes who can't always afford to maintain those historic properties, to make sure that we have resources to assist them in doing so without losing their properties while still maintaining the historic character. So happy to be here with you today. Happy to have jumped on to say hello. Look forward to having a more in-depth meeting at some time in the future when we can talk more specific on issues that are important, things that may be coming before the Congress, or things that might be able to weigh in on either the state or local side of things. But please know that you have a friend here. Know that Leslie Bowie can find me when I'm hiding. She and her husband are very, very dear friends of mine, and do an incredible job on the ground in Louisiana.
Congressman, thank you so much for taking a minute. Two quick things to wrap up. Fairleigh Jackson we just recognized her as our Preservation Action Hero of the Year, who hails from your state. So you've got a great advocate there.
Congratulations, fantastic.
And we will want to formally invite you to join the Historic Preservation Caucus. The Democratic co-chair is Blumenauer, and he'll be a great ally on all things historic preservation in the House. So we look forward to following up with you, and safe travels. We'll see you in DC.
All right, fantastic. Thank you all. Continue the great work. God bless.
All right, take care. All right, Shaw, you back on? Yep. Excellent. Well, thank you for taking a pause, and you were about to tell us about the new report.
Well, thanks, Russ. And yeah, I was just about to get started here. Let me see if I can advance the slide. So really what we wanted to do is demonstrate to the administration how historic preservation fits in with a number of key priorities that President Biden has identified as the nation emerges out of the pandemic. These include economic recovery, racial equity, and climate change. And the point of this report is to show how historic preservation fits in and really offers many solutions in these spaces, and how historic preservation promotes economic growth, helps communities rebuild, utilizes historic places to advance racial equity, and also supports sustainable and equitable development. So on the economic recovery side, the president has called for a robust response to the pandemic. We've seen those actions to date. And we are recommending a number of items in support of economic recovery, enhancing the historic tax credit, which Merrill Hoopengardner will speak to in just a moment, We've heard a little bit more about the Historic Preservation Fund. We also support fully funding the HPF at $150 million, but also a supplemental funding for the HPF to aid in COVID recovery to SHPOs and TIPOs and to the various grant programs that are under the HPF. As you heard from my colleague Kelly, also providing direct support for Main Street, which would really help these communities recover in stronger ways. One other point is how preservation trades and job training factors in. We've seen that emerge in a number of the president's proposals, and we'd like to make sure that that's on their radar as well. So a few examples for you. This is the Hotel Arvon in Great Falls, Montana. It's a recent historic tax credit project, a small boutique hotel and restaurant, but really has served to revitalize this community, which is we see replicated throughout the country. Second photo is the National Trust's Hope Crew. That's hands-on preservation experience, where youth are invited in to learn preservation skills. And here you see Hope Crew working on the childhood home of Nina Simone, which is an exciting project to see preserved. And then finally, I wanted to note just HPF, how that's supported community local governments, the National Park Service program, investment in Wheeling, West Virginia. And Kelly can correct me if I'm mistaken, but I believe Wheeling is a Main Street that did receive the Great American Main Street Award, I believe a few years ago. So just an example of how these programs work on the ground. On racial equity, we had a number of recommendations as well. The Biden-Harris administration has emphasized that a full economic recovery must also advance racial equality, and bold investments were needed as part of the infrastructure investments. So a few things that we want to make sure are part of that proposal, and that is ensuring that communities most impacted by development are informed and engaged in the regulatory process. We recommend growing HPF grant programs that support diverse history of our nation and telling the full story, the preservation story of our country. And as has been mentioned previously, supporting the creation of affordable housing and preventing displacement of disadvantaged minority populations in our older and historic neighborhoods. Few examples here. National Historic Preservation Act and through Section 106 and NEPA are key ways that ensure community awareness and engagement in that process. That those need to remain strong and intact through the infrastructure planning. Again, here's a Historic Preservation Fund. One of the grant programs is the Underrepresented Community Grant. Here it was used to help nominate a sacred cemetery of the Cupeño people to the National Register. And another example, here's the Cambridge building where we saw the historic tax credits combined with the low-income housing tax credits to convert this 100-year-old hotel into 157 units of affordable housing in Seattle, Washington. So an important example there, and we see that happening throughout the country. And then finally on climate change, we're seeing the administration launching its effort to create jobs and build a modern, sustainable infrastructure. A few of the climate recommendations that we've put forward are supporting building reuse and retrofitting. Again, a lot of that is accomplished through the historic tax credit. Improving baseline data on cultural resources, promoting renewable energy development on public lands, and including historic preservation efforts in the 30 by 30 initiative that's being discussed on the Hill and by the administration. few examples here. The House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis has looked at this issue, and in its report from the 116th Congress noted that incentivizing further building reuse could be used to reduce embodied emissions. This is an area that we're very focused on and have important research to share. But a few key things to keep in mind when thinking about older and historic communities and climate. Building construction and operation, according to the AIA, American Institute of Architects, accounts for more than 50% of total carbon emissions. And then here's another fact to take away. 125 million buildings in the United States, 50 million are at least 50 years old, which is the back of the hand sort of estimation as to whether they qualify for historic tax credits. So a lot of eligible activity for incentives and opportunities to address sustainability issues there. For the full report, we'd ask you to visit forum.savingplaces.org. And there's a lot more in that report, so feel free to reach out at any point to learn more. That's it for me, Russ. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Shaw, and please, everyone, encourage you to check out that report. Next, I want to go to our final speaker, Merrill Hoopengardner, who's with us today. She's going to play clean up here in the batting order, and she's going to give you an overview of the Tax Credit Coalition work and the NTCIC. And at the close, we're going to open up for questions, and I'm going to turn that portion over to our PA board chair, Bree Gorsicki. So I'm going to say thank you for now and turn it over to Merrill. Merrill, thank you.
Thank you, Russ. Well, I'm happy to move to a baseball analogy after our hockey team got an unceremonious exit from the Stanley Cup playoffs last night as a Washington Capitals fan. So maybe the Nationals will have a better season this year. I'm happy to come to talk to you again. This time I want to orient our conversation about how we think about the historic tax credit is squarely within the four corners of what a potential infrastructure package might look like as Congress moves forward on this right now and into the summer, perhaps into the fall. As people may know, the House Ways and Means Committee had a hearing last week to talk about potential priorities for infrastructure. Mike Novogradac from Novogradac and Company testified on behalf of several different economic and community development tax credits, and included in his testimony and in some of the questions he responded to was a focus on the historic tax credit as one of the most tried and true credits in our tax code that enable economic development, historic preservation, and connect to infrastructure priorities for the country. So I want to highlight some of those things too, so we can all help our members of Congress and their staff see how well aligned the historic tax credit is with what Congress hopes to move forward with yet this year. So first, I'll talk about things in alignment with the Biden administration's American Jobs Plan. So as the framework has currently been laid out, you see so many ways that the historic tax credit specifically and historic preservation broadly align with the administration's plans. There are millions of homes and commercial buildings that are in need of rehab. As Shaw mentioned, many of these are very old and could be eligible for the historic tax credit. Without even knowing that Congressman Carter would be on today's call, the first project I have to show you an example of is the Pythian, which was the former Knights of Pythias property that was built right after Reconstruction in New Orleans and highlighted was really the business and community location for the African-American community in New Orleans in the early 1900s. The building lived several different lives before it was literally covered up and kind of left for dead in kind of a hidden commercial part of the city. As part of the rehabilitation, we were able to finance with the federal historic credit together with state credits and the new markets tax credit. We were able to bring this building back into life, and it now has many of these features that you see in the alignment with the administration's plans. You have mixed income housing, you have supportive services provided for people in need of medical care, and really a job incubator on the ground floor for commercial operations, for small businesses in the restaurant space. It's been a really challenging year for projects that are doing restaurants, commercial activity, retail, hospitality, some of the things the historic tax credit has done so well for us over the years. These are places where the COVID epidemic has created many challenges for projects to stay in operation or to attract financing. And so we're looking for opportunities to improve that as we move into next year. So first I'll talk about how the historic tax credit can be something we think of as the sticks and bricks and roads and bridges part of infrastructure, hard infrastructure, if you will, not just soft infrastructure. And I'll remind you that, you know, even 5 or 10 years ago, we probably wouldn't have thought of broadband as something that is infrastructure. And today it just rolls off the tongue. So this is another way of thinking about how we connect our built environment with the way we think of infrastructure. And we can take buildings that are vacant or idle and used to be manufacturing facilities or department stores or downtown retail centers and don't have an economic use in today's economy, but we can repurpose them through the tool that the historic tax credit provides into something that is community serving again. As Shaw mentioned, it's a huge jobs generator, both in terms of number of jobs. The construction involved in a historic tax credit job involves more labor on site. It also involves higher paid labor on site than an equal sized ground up new construction project. So as we think about infrastructure as the American Jobs Plan, the historic tax credit is a big contributor to this. This is also a place where we see other things aligning as well, like our Duncan incubator project that's in St. Louis. It's a place where you can activate small businesses, host job incubators, encourage technology innovation and workforce development. My background itself is the Hohen lithograph property in Baltimore, a nod to Senator Cardin, who's been a long champion of the historic tax credit as well. This is a former printmaking facility, no longer able to be used for that purpose, but is now a place for workforce development for people learning the construction trades. And also an opportunity to encourage research and development, especially in low-income communities. More than half of historic tax credit eligible projects are located in very severely economically distressed areas, and 3/4 are in generally underserved communities. So as we try to achieve the equitable outcomes that Shaw mentioned, the HTC is already built in as a powerful tool for that. And then one more nod to Congressman Carter. This is the Rose Collaborative Project, a former church, Catholic church complex in the Treme neighborhood in New Orleans that has gone through an adaptive reuse and now has what was the first African-American focused job incubator in New Orleans, created since Katrina, as well as a school and a community facility that provides a resource for arts, which ties to other priorities of the community, and then contributing to adjacent development of affordable housing, job training as well. Important tools for the historic tax credit. So I'll bring us to our ask. Many of you have heard this before, so I'll give you a quick summary and I'll put a link in the chat so you can go see more details of this. Thank you to Congressman Blumenauer, Congressman LaHood, who've led the House Historic Tax Credit Growth and Opportunity Act for this year. We're working with champions in the Senate to bring forward a bill on the Senate side as well. We would have many features you saw in prior HTC Go Act provisions, including permanent changes to the credit that would make it more functional for small projects, including bumping the credit percentage for small projects, making more buildings eligible by lowering the substantial rehab test. So you don't have to make the building be totally decrepit before you can go through a rehab and get the credits. Eliminate the basis adjustment, which would bring more value to the credit and make it simpler to use, and would make it more accessible for tax exempt sponsored projects. And then I'll come back to the top and say the thing that's new this year and ties back to our priorities given where we are at this second year of going into COVID related challenges in the country is to seek a 20 to 30%, take the permanent credit from 20 to temporarily to 30% for all projects for 5 years, modeled on the success that we saw the HTC have in places like New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina that had a similar bump to the credit. So we want to supercharge the way that the HTC can be used as a tool for economic recovery through this temporary provision. A quick reminder of how you too can be engaged in this. Please do reach out to your member of Congress to support the House bill that's out. You can be in touch with us about the status of the Senate bill, which we are hopeful to see in short order. And I encourage you to think of this year's engagement opportunity as a way of framing all the ways that the historic tax credit can be beneficial to infrastructure as we think about returning our historic assets back into productive use and reconnecting them with the rest of the components of infrastructure in our communities. I'll pause there and we will welcome any questions.
Thank you, Merrill. Let me change my view real quick here. There we go. Awesome. Well, hi, everyone. My name is Brianna Gersicki. I'm Chairwoman of Preservation Action. I'm so proud of the panel we put together for you today. Ted, Valerie, Kelly, Shaw, and Merrill are full of knowledge and experience about the Federal Historic Preservation Program. And as you can see, much of their work expands the efforts of historic preservation and reaches more people. So we're so glad to have you all on today. I wanted to give a shout out real quick and thank you to the Historic Preservation Caucus and the staffers, John Bosworth in Representative Blumenauer's office and Maggie Ward in Representative Turner's office. Thank you for helping get the word out about this congressional briefing today. I believe our staffer, Rob Naylor, will be dropping in the chat a briefing packet that you may download. And this recording will also be available on our website and on our Facebook page. So I see we have a few questions. There's one in the Q&A that I will ask first. This goes to Merrill. I see you typing an answer, but for everybody else, are there more opportunities for communities to learn about the HTC, LIHTC opportunity zones, and new markets tax credits? The Novogradac webinars are a little steep in the learning curve. So Merrill?
Yes, we do from time to time. So I'll give a shout out to our colleagues at the National Trust. The forum webinars from time to time include a deeper dive on other topics, including several that are in this list. Last year, we did a couple that included a deep dive on opportunity zones. NTCIC also offers some of these from time to time. We're very heavily involved in the new markets tax credit in combination with historics. So if you reach out to me, I'm happy to make sure you're included in our distribution list. And then one of the real challenges we hear about from the field a lot is the difficulty in combining historic and new markets together to serve smaller projects. And we worked with our colleagues at the National Main Street Center on a webinar series that we still have available for people. We did it last year, but we still have all those materials recorded, so we can also make that available to you as well.
Awesome. Well, a couple other questions rolling in here. Merrill, what is the outlook for the HTC Go in the House and its chances for inclusion in the infrastructure bill versus its current route?
Oh, you know, considering where we are in the legislative cycle, that's like asking me to consult my magic 8-ball, but I will say we are extremely encouraged by the discussions we've had with our champions in the House. We know that the provisions we seek right now were included in last summer's Moving Forward Act, which was HR2 and is thought to be the starting point for the drafting that the House is doing this year on the infrastructure bill. So we're encouraged that the HTC would likely be included in the first draft that the House comes up with. I don't have the pen, so I can't promise that outcome, but we're very encouraged by that. And we know we have bipartisan support in the House and in the Senate. So we're hopeful that if we get in the first draft, we continue to stay through all the way to the bill's final conclusion. And hopefully we have these long needed improvements to the credit ready to go before the end of this year.
Thank you. I see our friend Roderick Scott from Louisiana has a few questions that I think should probably go to Shaw about tax credits for disaster recovery or other inclusion of climate adaptation into any of the infrastructure bills, or is climate adaptation and action a term you've been working with?
Well, first on disaster tax credits, I'd note, as Rod probably knows pretty well, that the historic tax credit after Hurricane Katrina was increased to help with that disaster for a number of years. So we've actually seen how Congress has used the historic tax credit to respond to disasters. That's something that we would continue and do continue to advocate for when those disasters do happen. But primarily our focus after disasters is on the funding side and increased funding for Historic Preservation Fund, which is something that we also do advocate for. But a new tax credit, I'd need a few more details about what you might have in mind, Rod. But in terms of climate adaptation actions, I think you're right to point out that we're really just scratching the surface in terms of how historic preservation can and should contribute to climate solutions. What I wanted to do today is highlight a number of recommendations that we have highlighted for the Biden administration to start that conversation. So we'd welcome additional input from our colleagues around the country on that as well.
Thank you. Can I ask all the panelists to make sure to throw your email in the chat, just so anyone who has additional questions can quickly grab that and connect with you. We have, I think, pretty much reached the end of our time here. So might ask if you have additional questions, reach out to the panelists individually. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. This recording will be available on Preservation Action's website, our YouTube channel, and our Facebook. So thank you all so much for joining us and being engaged with us this afternoon. Have a good rest of the week.
Okay, so we're muted, and you guys can leave the room if you want to, but the Facebook Live stream is ending.
Awesome. Thank you.
Oh man, I didn't know there was a Facebook Live. I would have shared that. I'm sorry, y'all. I missed that.
I think you can do it after the fact. It lives on there.
Perfect. Well, hey y'all, excellent job. Thank y'all so much for everything. I'm so glad Representative Carter got to jump on. That was great. So thank you all so much for everything, and onward and upward.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks.
Take care.